And are we now live? And Karen, can you confirm we are now live?
That's us, yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's meeting of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, which is being held in the manner in which I think you're all now very familiar, via Microsoft Teams. And during the current restrictions and guidance on distancing, we've taken the decision to live stream the video of all committees as well as the board to the SPA's website. So this meeting video, the public session, will be live streamed to the website. And as I draw your attention to the housekeeping, everybody's got a copy of our Teams participant guidance. If I'm disconnected during meeting, Grant McCrae, one of our board members, will kindly step into the meeting when I get reconnected. During breaks, we'll keep the video conference open, but I'd ask all participants to mute and switch off their camera. Live streaming will stop until the meeting resumes again. Live streaming will cease at the end of the public session, and just by way of general guidance, both for those attending and those observing, I'm hoping that we will have finished the public session and break for lunch at approximately 1 o'clock, and then we'll resume for private session. And at that point, I'll invite anyone who is not participating in the private session to leave the meeting. So I now turn to the agenda for today's meeting, and a welcome obviously to participants. Apologies, I think we have no apologies from board members. So we have all of the 4 committee members of ARAC, and we're also joined by Michelle Miller, one of our board members who is our whistleblowing champion. We're joined by Gillian Woolman and Pauline Gillen of Audit Scotland, and a particular welcome to Jill Imrie, the Chief Inspector of HMICS, who is attending for the discussion on the important item 13. And then we have, if I say the usual, I don't mean to denigrate at all, the usual roster of SPA staff headed by our Chief Executive, Lynn Brown, and I think there are 8 or 9 actually SPA officers, and Police Scotland, and I think there are 9 of those as well, including David Page, Director of Corporate Services, and his team. I know we have apologies from ACC Alan Spears, who normally attends, but we have, as it were, in his place, Andy McDowell and Richard Thomas, who I think will field the questions that we have. So I think with that, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Thank you very much. The minute from the meeting held on the 5th of May for approval. I've had no indication, although one of our members has kindly picked up some of the grammar and punctuation, which will be corrected in the published version. Otherwise, content. Thank you very much. The action log and matters arising. I think most of these are proposed to close. Internal audit report will perhaps come to that when we're talking about the internal audit plan, but I think that seems likely. For the rest, any comments or any views on those proposals from committee members? Are you content with them all? Yeah. I wondered if I could just pick up in particular the one that is the performance management report, where ACC Spears was confirmed timeline for the recommendation in respect of performance management. And there's an explanation here about that slightly extended timeline. I just draw your attention to that. Michelle, I don't mean to spring this on you, but perhaps staff can answer that. Is this an issue that will come to the policing performance? Is it being looked at in that level of detail? Probably not.
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, right. Fair enough.
I don't, because I'm not familiar with your papers. So, yeah. In terms of the cross-referencing, but it may, I don't know if Lynn maybe can respond to that, but.
I think it's really responsive for Police Scotland, and we'll come back to you if we take that offline, Chair. We'll get the answer.
That's fine. It was just a question. Okay, and yes, I think that's fine. Okay, good. And finally, a decision on taking business in private. I've indicated we'll be looking for a private session, and we're talking about items 8 through to 13 inclusive, which, as anybody viewing the agenda can see, includes some reports on fraud and the consideration of the draft annual report and accounts. Content? Thank you very much. Okay, then we move on to whistleblowing, and this is something which the committee, the board, the organisations take this matter very seriously and have been reviewing policies, guidance, practice, procedures over some time. We were committed to an annual report being brought to this committee, one from the SPA and one from Police Scotland. So can I invite Lynn to introduce this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to Michelle Miller for attending, who's a whistleblowing champion. So this is a report for 2021, and it covers SPA, corporate and forensics. As you've already said, Chair, Police Scotland will report on the whistleblowing issues within Police Scotland. This report benefited from a discussion back in January at ARAC, and we've taken that forward. And also one of the things that was agreed was to have a self-assessment against the whistleblowing best practice, and that is set out in the report. So that's set out in a section, and it's RAG stated, so that the one area that's amber is on training, and that's mainly because we still need to do more training within forensics, and also we need to determine and confirm how we want this to be more ongoing going forward. So that's an area that needs to be completed, and we are taking that forward. Also in the report we set out actions for 21-22, and again I would welcome feedback from members on those proposed actions. Second thing is the report, separate from 21-21, covers the 6-monthly update, and in it we set out that we have one case within SPA and forensics on whistleblowing. It is a complex case. It also covers grievance procedures, etc. And until they are resolved, we're not reporting back on lessons learned from that case, but we fully intend to do so. The other area was that there was a discussion that has been ongoing with unions around a single policy between ourselves and Police Scotland. And the view of the committee and my view is that we focus on reporting where we are, rather than having a single policy, and that's why Police Scotland are here with their very detailed report as well as ours, and hopefully we are continuing our dialogue with the unions to see if that's acceptable to them. So that's just a bit of brief background, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me hand it over to firstly committee members in terms of, are we content that this has followed the process that we indicated, and so it's appropriate we get the annual report and that update. Any questions on that, committee members? Katerina.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for the report. It's really good to see the progress that has been made, and it's good to see the self-assessment. Now, my question relates to that. So within whistleblowing, obviously training is quite important to make sure that everybody is aware of what the procedures are, etc. But I think what's also really important is whether staff actually have the confidence to access the procedure and to use it to the way it's designed to be used. So I was wondering, what activity have you undertaken, or what is planned to assess the levels of staff confidence in the system?
In terms of, I've set out in the assessment against the code of practice, is that we've taken, in terms of SPA corporate, we've done the training, and staff of being given guidance as to how it works and how they can use it. Forensics need to do some more work around that. One of the things for me is, because this is actually at this committee, staff see that it's important. They know that committee members will be asking and tracking how we implement and improve it. In terms of your proposal around assessing how confident they are, I think that's a really good suggestion, and I'll take that on board. We don't have that built in yet as to how it would work. We always said when we set that out, with our numbers, 50 staff in SPA and I think 500 forensics, hopefully the numbers of people whistleblowing would be very, very small. It would be a real concern if they weren't. But again, that's because that is why it's so important that the committee look at it. So I'll take on board your suggestion, Katerina, around how we assess how it's working. I'd like the training in forensics has to be completed though. But the policy itself is very, very straightforward. It's very well written. It's very clear. And it's on our website. Our staff are aware of it. And I'm hoping that if they feel the need to use it, they will do so.
Thank you. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. And Lynn, thank you too for a very clear report. My question is really more in relation to all the actions in 3.3, which I'm very supportive of. I wondered if it would be possible in the 6-monthly review, the 6-monthly update that we're going to get, that you're talking about, if we can get some indication about the progress with implementing the training required, and also some of the things that are on that list, like engaging with trade unions on the activity and the various actions, really just to get a progress report at the 6-monthly stage as how that's all going, I think would be helpful.
Thank you, Grant. Absolutely. The purpose is for the 6-monthly so we can update you in areas that you're particularly focused on, and we will include that in our 6-monthly report back to ARAC.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I invite Michelle as our whistleblowing champion, if you sat outside of the process, as it were, if you are content?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So a couple of observations, really. First of all, I think the report's really valuable, as is the plea. I think some of my comments relate to both, given that they're kind of more generalist rather than specifically relating to either police or SPA or indeed forensics. So I think they're really helpful, but I would want to really echo Katerina's point, which is, at the end of the day, one of the main drivers of this is about culture change, or culture creation, if you like, around making people feel comfortable about, saying that emperor has no clothes on, or I'm concerned about this or that, or what have you. And that's really the nub of it for me. So, and given that the numbers are very small, I think there are two issues that relate to that. One is we would want to try and explore the extent to which people do indeed feel comfortable. And the reason that they're not using whistleblowing as an option is because there are no concerns that they want to express. Or indeed, if they do have concerns that they want to express, what is it that is stopping them about the arrangements that they perceive in relation to the policies and the practice that we then, both Police Scotland, SPA, Forensics, will need to take on board in order to encourage that change of culture. So I think that's the key for me. So the self-assessment is good, it's positive in both reports, and the actions I think are fine. But they don't, in some ways, I think, go far enough in terms of exploring what people's real sense of the impact of the policy, the impact of the training, and that kind of culture within the organisations around, yes, I feel quite happy to do this, and I'm not doing it because I don't have any concerns. So that's the nub of it, and I'd like to see, and I don't know whether, you know, it might be something that the whistleblowing champion could lead on in terms of, this is just off the top of my head, so I would want to explore this with colleagues in SPA and Police Scotland about how we might craft something that began to test people's thoughts and views and feelings around the policy. So I think that is my key point. And the other one is around the joint policy. And, you know, at some point, we're going to have to leave this alone or make a decision around, you know, we're going to do this. Personally, I think just in terms of uniformity and singularity of message across the whole complex organisation and the different parts of it, it would be better if we had a single overarching policy statement that said this is how we are going to operate as a system, and then for each bit of the organisation, Police Scotland, SPA, forensics, potentially to have different you know, workflow diagrams in terms of their procedures to implement the policy, and that would allow for that single system. Having said all of that, if that is going to require so much energy and resource to get us there, as long as each of the individual policies meet the legislative requirements, meet our own aspirations in terms of our culture change and our position, I really don't think that we should, you know, invest too much energy in trying to change people's minds. Yes, if we can all agree. If not, let's make sure that they all are fit for purpose and carry on, and just make sure we focus on the really important things. So I think those are my two kind of key observations around the issue as presented today.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think, in fairness, that's pretty much the committee's position, is that actually it's 80-20 or even 90-10. What's the expenditure of effort required, and also some of the well, you can have a singular overarching policy, but it would be very generic. And the issues at the end of the day, I think we're all agreed, are that staff have a confidence in the system within which they are working. I think my observation would be whistleblowing hugely important, but actually it's the safety net, and we want to make sure that we are putting as much, if not more, effort into our ongoing performance management and support system to ensure that problems are dealt with, issues are dealt with upstream, as it were, in terms of ongoing performance. And for that purpose, the fact that we have, in governance terms, set up a new people committee, which is concentrating on the people issues, I think will be very helpful. And if we have dealt with issues and staff have a confidence and there is an effective system upstream, then the impact will be that we will always hopefully have relatively few in terms of numbers coming through whistleblowing, because staff will have had the confidence and management will have had the confidence and the expertise to deal with things upstream. Good, thank you very much. Can we perhaps now move on to Police Scotland and their complementary report? Andy, are you introducing this?
I am indeed, Chair. Good morning committee, and good morning colleagues. On behalf of ACC Spears, you have the paper committee in front of you, Police Scotland's annual report in relation to whistleblowing, and I think a very important point has been made both by Ms Miller and the Chief Executive around organisational culture, in that whistleblowing was never seen as a panacea for Police Scotland, and it's actually part of a wider mechanism relative to developing an organisational culture that supports our people, protects our people, particularly when they want to raise concerns or report wrongdoing. And there's a number of mechanisms in place beyond whistleblowing, and the term safety net was used, and we very much regard whistleblowing as being ultimately very much the last resort for staff. It can be a first point of contact or a first point of report should staff feel or people feel the need to go through the whistleblowing mechanism. But we have management referrals. We want to build a culture where our people feel empowered to speak to their managers, report concerns, report wrongdoing. Integrity matters that currently exists, that anonymous reporting mechanism through the PSD Gateway unit, which has been in place since 2017, following an HMICS recommendation, following a review of the then counter-corruption unit. There's also complaints about the police where relevant. On certain occasions, our people can raise competent complaints about the police, and there's the grievance procedure. So there are a number of mechanisms in place at the moment within Police Scotland beyond whistleblowing, all designed to build that organisational culture, as I say, of support and protection. So the journey that we've been on since 2017 through 2019, where we engaged the services of Protect as an independent advice line to provide whistleblowing advice and to receive reports from our people. The training, the CPD events that we have delivered, and the work that we intend to do moving forward. Similarly to the SPA, we have undertaken a recent self-assessment of where we are with whistleblowing, a benchmarking exercise along with the support of Protect, which was really useful, which has highlighted a number of areas of development for us in the future in terms of governance, engagement, and just our operational response to whistleblowing. And actually for the future, how do we measure how effective our whistleblowing policies are, and actually the practical application of that policy for our people who report concerns and wrongdoing. Members may be aware that one of the Dame Eilish recommendations was that PERC should also become an independent receiving house and reporting mechanism for our people within Police Scotland to report and to blow the whistle directly to PERC. There are a number of concerns that I know the Commissioner has, having been involved in those discussions, about how that would actually work in practice effectively, on the basis that at a point PERC would need to come back into Police Scotland to make them aware that we have a whistleblower, and that whistleblower needs to be afforded the required protection under the legislation. But those discussions are ongoing at the moment. So as I say, members, the report is there provided with some data. I would touch on the data so at the opposite end of the spectrum from the SPA, with approximately 22,000 members of staff working for the organisation. Members might raise an eyebrow in relation to the relatively low numbers of whistleblowing reports that have been received by Police Scotland year on year since 2017. Again, I would caveat those figures by saying there are already in existence a number of reporting mechanisms, both anonymously and otherwise, that our people can use within Police Scotland to report concerns and wrongdoing to managers and the organisation. As I say, and that's important context that I think needs to be provided in relation to those figures. And I'm quite happy to take now questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, the context and the history, which I think is useful, particularly for those of us who are not dealing with this on the daily basis. But yes, questions, comments, particularly about the annual report, with which we are presented, and are we content, I think is the question. Katerina.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the presentation. It is hugely encouraging to hear the concept of a safety net and the focus on the cultural change and the additional reporting mechanisms. So I think that is really important to hear that. Having said that, if I draw parallels, for example, with the National Health Service, where similarly there is a national service, so one national employer. And if you compound that with the fact that within Police Scotland, clearly it's a command and control type organisation, so it's a very hierarchical organisation, the whistleblowing channel nonetheless, in my view, remains a very important safety net. And I do note the low numbers of cases, and again that takes us to the point that Michelle made earlier around the fact that we can never really quite know for sure whether this is because everything else has been reported through the business as usual route, or whether maybe staff might not have the full confidence to use the whistleblowing channel as it is intended. So again, I suppose I've got two questions. My first one relates to the gateway mechanism that has been established. And I was wondering if you could maybe provide a little bit more detail as to what assurance is actually in place over the assessments conducted by that very critical function, because effectively they act as a gatekeeper. So that's my first question. And my second question is very similar to the question I asked of Lynn, of the SPA Chief Executive. It's around, particularly considering that your self-assessment scored you relatively low. I think your lowest score is around communications and training. So my second question is, what activities have you done, or what activity is in plan to assess the actual levels of staff confidence in the whistleblowing process? Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, and yes. If you care to answer as succinctly as is possible.
I will. I certainly will. With it, question one, the Gateway Unit has a hierarchical management structure, and only those officers that work within that intel and information function within the Gateway actually have access to that information. It is not widely shared. It is treated with confidentiality. And there are only certain individuals within the Professional Standards Department, I being one, the ECC being another, who actually have access to that information. So the information that's provided, irrespective in what format and for what purpose, is very much on a need-to-know basis and is restricted and locked down and sanitised accordingly, in accordance with all Police Scotland intel handling processes and procedures. I hope that answers question one.
Two, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the confidentiality and the assurance, I think, is.
And in terms of what's coming next, we absolutely recognise that we have more work to do. Members will see the Appendix A, which we published on the Force intranet back on whistleblowing, National World Whistleblower Day on the 23rd of June. We recognise that we perhaps have lost a little bit of ground in the past year. I'm going to utilise the cover-all excuse of COVID-19 for that, but genuinely we have had other focus in the past year. But we absolutely identified through our self-assessment where we are at the moment, the fact that 3 years on, 4 years on from when we first explored whistleblowing, we need to review our policies and our practices, and part of that will undoubtedly be inputs, training, being embedded into managerial courses within Police Scotland, further CPD events, online Moodle training within the organisation, and further communication internally within the force to emphasise and to identify the whistleblowing route of reporting should it be required, but also alongside the other mechanisms that I've already spoken about, all wrapped around that organisational culture and identifying the right reasons as to why we're going to be doing that. But that's all for the future, all for the forthcoming year, but our plans are in place to do that.
Okay, I don't want to truncate the discussion too much, but I think maybe what I'm going to say, and this might help with the other questions, is I've got here 2 action points really. It's both for the SPA and Police Scotland to consider how we measure the application of the process and staff confidence in the process, and allied to that, that at the 6-month report stage, because we're due a 6-month report from each, that includes specifically reporting back on that action and reporting back on the training. So I think that gives some guidance for what we are definitely wanting to see. Those are commitments that each of the organisations, have made. So I hope that is not too contentious. Given that, are there indeed any more questions or thoughts or comments on the annual report? Katrina.
Hello, yes, thank you. Just very briefly, I just, on the back of that, you know, is there any way of measuring, or have you considered how you might measure whether there is any, and the Chief Executive does touch on this in her report, you know, is there an impact, a negative impact or otherwise on any specific populations within the Police Scotland? So, you know, in terms of equalities and diversities, are you doing anything, or can you think of any way of measuring whether that is happening?
Yeah. Can that be considered, Andy, as part?
Yeah, that absolutely will be considered as part of the equality and diversity work that Police Scotland is currently, that journey that we're currently on, being led by DCC Taylor, which is a golden thread that essentially is running through everything that we're doing in the organisation at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I should perhaps give the last word to Michelle as our champion, and with those commitments in what will come to us in the next 6-month report. You content?
Absolutely. I think that was the key for me, is you know, lots of activity described, but an evaluation of the impact and a sense of how individuals feel confident in using the system will then allow us to tie together the numbers of whistleblowing with being confident that that's a true number as opposed to a deflated number. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's a very good discussion. Thank you, everybody, for that. And we'll move on now to what is a really significant, I think, agenda item here, which is addressing HMICS reports. We talked at the last committee about how we had made such progress with internal audit that actually now it was entirely appropriate that we start to focus on some of the parallel activities dealing with primarily operational rather than corporate services coming from HMICS. I'm delighted to welcome Jill Emery to this meeting. But we start not, if I may, with Jill, but with our Chief Executive, Lynn Brown, who is outlining for us a paper on the governance pathway that SPA will adopt in ensuring that it is exercising the right oversight over HMICS reports. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for Ms. Emery for attending. I think that's really, really important for this part of the agenda. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and I want to pass over to John McNellis to take you through the paper. But this looks relatively straightforward, but it's taken us a while to get here, is probably how I put it, which is, you know, it's Police Scotland, forensics, complex organisations, HMICS have a real role in inspecting that, and just how do we make sure there is appropriate oversight. So this governance pathway is proposing to do that. I'll ask John to take through the detail, but the intention is that we are clear and publicly clear that we've received the reports, we're considering them, and what has to happen. So that's the background, Chair. If you're okay with that, I'd quite like to pass over to John just to touch base on more detail on the pathway. Thank you.
John McNellis.
Thanks, Lynn, for that introduction. I'll probably draw your attention to the Appendix A, so the diagram, which looks to just summarise the pathway itself. First steps, of course, the annual scrutiny plan by HMICS, which is just coming up next. But really, whenever HMICS publish a report, what we're looking to do is provide initially a summary of that to all members with a link to the report to have a look at that if they so wish. And then the Chief Executive, Lynn, will have a look at that with SPA officers and make a recommendation as to what we think the most appropriate route or committee is to formally consider that report. And that will take place, and we'll invite HMICS to report on that. A question has came up on this about the recommendations, the action plan coming from HMICS reports. So on completion of a report, there is a 3-month period for Police Scotland and the SPA to come up with an action plan of how we'll address the findings. And what we're proposing is that action plan will come to ARAC as part of the ongoing monitoring reports that you see of audit and recommendations tracking. And again, as part of normal practice, ARAC will be responsible for monitoring achievement of recommendations. That isn't entirely clear within this diagram, and I will take that on board and happy to update it. That's probably all I was going to draw out. Thank you, Chair.
Lynn?
Chair, yes, can I maybe add to that, because HMICS reports are slightly different from what members will be familiar with Audit Scotland or with internal audit, where the recommendations are all agreed before they come to ARAC. The HMICS report make the reports, they're in public, and my preference is that members see them as soon as they can, recognising that Police Scotland will not have responded in terms of the recommendations, what the action plan is. I think that's okay. I think members will then have a view to say, well, actually, these recommendations are really important to us. These ones, you know, fair enough. So to give a sort of view in it. So there will be a bit of a time lag, but I would recommend that members get an ability to consider the report in public with HMICS there as soon as after it's published. And we will know when they're going to be published, hopefully, and we can build that into different committees depending on the topic that's being inspected. Just to give a bit of context. Thank you, Chair.
I must say, from my perspective, sight of the action plan, which is the equivalent of management response to an internal audit, which you would see in the more conventional internal audit plan. Sight of the action plan, I think, across committees, whichever is the relevant committee, because I think if we are referring things to a different committee, it's not only ARAC which should be seeing the action plan, it's the other committee. So I think that's immensely valuable. I have a couple more questions about other aspects of the process as it goes on, but the important thing, I think, at this point is about the entry point and being sure that we have the right governance as HMICS reports arise. And I particularly welcome the thought that HMICS can present to a committee, as indeed Jill is doing now with the hate crime report, which is coming to us. So I just wanted to ask perhaps Jill if she is content with this approach, because I think that's critically important.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that this is a great addition to the kind of scrutiny arrangements. I think HMICS obviously is motivated to try and improve policing for the benefit of the public. So any opportunity to amplify the good things that HMICS identify through inspections and also to help give momentum to address challenges that HMICS scrutiny identifies is really, really welcome. So, and I think the SPA's role in that is crucial. So yes, I'd be happy to support this pathway.
Thank you very much. There's more to add. There are other steps, if that's the right image to introduce. Any thoughts, comments from members on what we have before we move on perhaps a little bit to what we might also add? Katrina?
Yes, Thank you, Chair. No, I'm absolutely, just to echo what the Chair already has said. It's really good to see this pathway outlined, and as the Chair already mentioned, I think the steps that we see are at the entry point of the reports into the system. And I suppose I was wondering to what degree you have considered the governance that possibly sits at the other end of the process. So when recommendations are completed, ready for closure, and any post-closure assurance activity, have you given consideration to what the governance might look like at that stage?
Very good question.
Shall I come in there, Chair?
Yes,
if I may?
please.
Thank you, Katerina. Yes, I would say at present the process is ARAC oversee the progress against recommendations, and any reports would just continue to be in that already established governance route. And you'll see in the reports today, you'll get quite a few in terms of where we are on different HMICS reports. So I just see it as normal practice. What we struggled with before was the entry point. And where did the reports go? And then they suddenly appeared in ARAC as, to be tracked, and there hadn't been that hinterland of consideration. So the end bit, I think for my issue on that is it can be very protracted, where we think something is closed. Police Scotland can obviously comment. If Mr. Spears was here, he would comment himself on Police Scotland side. But from the SPA side, we think things are closed. HMICS need to be convinced before they discharge it. So there is more work to be done there, and I've spoken to Ms. Imrie about that. And we're committed to from our side to helping to make that, to get things discharged quicker. So the system's already there. I think that works. The entry point was not clear, and we're just trying to match it all up. We don't have that on this sort of pathway, and your question, we will then add that in so there's a complete picture. I think that's what the Chair might have been referring to earlier as well.
I think it does occur to me as we look, and also a couple of other things that are coming up, that what would be particularly helpful, I think, both for visibility, for clarity, for public interest and public confidence, is if we could see an end-to-end process and an articulation of the end-to-end process, not in any great complexity. I mean, I would suggest 2 pages of A4 with 1 diagram ought to be able to do it, but that actually, because there are 3 elements to this, there is the SPA, there is HMICS, there is Police Scotland, and I think we'll come to that. Actually, we'll come to the next item, but how Police Scotland themselves track the process and are assured in then reporting to the SPA. So I think it would be really good to capture that, and if we capture that in a flowchart, we can identify if there are any gaps. So I think that would be an action point I would really like to see if committee members are agreed with that. Yeah, okay, thank you. Good, I think we'll progress. Any other comments from committee members? From Jill, anything? Okay, excellent. Well, with that clear governance pathway, we move on and indeed start to operate as a little in practice, I think, by looking at upstream HMICS's scrutiny plan, which has been relatively recently published. Jill, if you, I can hand over to you. Delighted to hear from you on this.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to address the committee and to have this conversation in public, because as I said about the governance pathway, it really is the public for whom HMICS is working to try and help ensure that there is strong levels of public confidence in policing, and that we can share the good practice and the significant work that Police Scotland and the authority does, as well as highlight some of the challenges and help, we hope, to be a catalyst for change and improvement. So the plan that you have and is publicly available on our website as well as in these papers identifies the priorities for the rest of this scrutiny year. So we run in a fiscal year, so from the remainder of this year until the end of March next year. And the scanning for the priorities that appear in this plan really goes on all the time through the liaison that we have with key post holders across the system and the attendance at meetings, not least the Strategic Scrutiny Group, which is a Scottish forum bringing together all scrutiny bodies and trying to ensure that what we decide to look at isn't duplicating and imposing too much of a burden on the system, with the scrutiny being applied from others. And we do normally a very specific consultation exercise for the content of this plan round about November time, and we will be doing that this year to inform the priorities for the next scrutiny year. But because of the pandemic, obviously, the priorities for last year's plan were a bit disrupted, and we felt that we would use the product of the consultation that we did to inform last year's plan in order to carry on through this year. So you can see on page 13 of the scrutiny plan, there's a list there of the various bodies that were specifically consulted about priorities. But ultimately, we get together as a team and discuss the various suggestions. Last time it included a survey of the public and their ideas of the things that we'd like to see the inspectorate consider. And that all culminates in the production of this plan. Clearly in that cycle, the scanning, the plan that you have before you, then the next stage is the delivery, those reports that we've just been talking about and the recommendations within those reports. And then there's that sort of fourth review stage in the cycle that we would look kind of 6 months into the year. Are those priorities still relevant? Are there things that we need to tweak and change? And then we'll give that sort of backward consideration in the annual report, which will be due shortly. But every time we think about an inspection, we're trying to consider if it is in the public interest, if there's something particularly important, high risk about the area, if there's legislation or policy change that we're trying to understand. Is there a gap in the evidence? And basically, can we add value? Can HMICS do something to improve a particular area of policing? So as I say, last year the plan was a little bit disrupted. And in March last year, I had suspended the inspection programme and returned police officers who are seconded to us back to Police Scotland. So we're not a big organisation. The secondees were one chief superintendent, a superintendent and 2 police inspectors who immediately went back to Police Scotland to help with the national response. If you turn to page 12 on the report, you'll see the sort of plan on a page, really, the kind of Gantt chart that shows the inspection priorities and across the course of the year. And you can see that, and you'll know that some of these have already been published. So the benefits realisation report was published on the 22nd of April this year, followed by the hate crime report on the 3rd of June. Then we had the COP26 assurance report publishing on the 24th of June, and the demand analysis report on the 29th of June. So we've had quite a a flurry of activities, some of which was rolled over, as I mentioned, from previous year. The online child sexual abuse progress review is in draft at the moment and will be available shortly. So looking ahead just to the remainder of this year, I just want to pick out a few things that are important, I think, that are coming up. So we'll be revisiting the COP26 assurance review. Within that, we made one recommendation, but we highlighted 31 areas of development. So we'll revisit those in late August, obviously giving Police Scotland time to have addressed those and made progress, but also hoping to intervene while there's still time to potentially change prior to the event itself in November. Then there's the custody priorities, part of that being the plan for the potentially increased number of demand on custody during COP26, but also for mental health provision for detainees and general health care provision for detainees, which is a constant priority for us and a constant desire to engage Healthcare Improvement Scotland in working jointly with us on that. And then domestic abuse, which Police Scotland identified.
Sadly, Jill has frozen on my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. It's tricky. I hope she's going to be able to come back.
Chair, I shall text her. I've got her number and see what's happening. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. While we're waiting on Jill, yeah, actually my questions are a couple of questions are ready for her. But I think what is most useful is to have this context and this account in public, because there's really nowhere else, I think, that the public get this very clear explanation of the process. I would say, and I think Jill knows this, so I think I'll say it now, but in terms of our governance pathway that we've just been discussing, the COP26 is something which I think ARAC will not delve deep into, because we have our COP26 oversight group, which is actually a formal part of our governance, and I think ARAC would expect to rely on an assurance from COP26. Jill, welcome back. I was just saying, and this is something you know, so I hope that's all right, that in terms of the COP26 oversight, and your recommendation was that the COP26 oversight group should actually be looking at that, and that's part of our formal governance. So I would expect the COP26 oversight board, chaired by Tom Halpin, one of our board members, to be looking at that in detail rather than ARAC to be looking at it in detail. ARAC can take an assurance from that board in terms of the governance pathway that we've been discussing and the assurance. So that was, I knew you knew that. So thanks. So was there anything else you wanted to add or highlight?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, everyone, for that kind of brief absence. Just very quickly, I think I possibly froze just at the point where I was just saying domestic abuse, and the other is the contact assessment model. Those are two areas that I think are going to be important for the rest of the year. And one last bit to highlight from the scrutiny plan is an improvement project, which is really our own HMICS looking at our own inspection framework, which again is available on the website, but also considering looking at the approaches of other scrutiny bodies, trying to learn from them, things that we can improve ourselves and the various approaches to inspection. So that was the last thing I wanted to highlight from the plan, and I hope I've left a few minutes for any questions.
Absolutely. Any questions or comments? Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Jill, that's a very helpful summary of the plan for 2021-22. The one point I was going to raise was how you actually report your findings. For example, in the next paper we're looking at that you're reporting and hate crime. On the last recommendation, number 12, you actually put in there as a matter of urgency. And I just wondered if there was any way of actually prioritising the actual recommendations that you make generally, because I think that would help everybody pick up the importance of the different ones. If you list a lot of recommendations, Police Scotland or the SPA or whoever else might not have quite the same understanding of how you see the priority unless they're actually graded in some sort of way. And I know every other report we get, whether it be from Audit Scotland or from any other organisation, an internal audit and so on, the grading, all the recommendations are graded in some shape or form. And I think that helps us to monitor how they're being developed. So your thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's a good point, and we'll think about that in that review that I just mentioned, that we're looking at our own methodology. I mean, the reason why the recommendations appear in the order that they do is because we are following our own inspection framework, which is, you know, broadly based on an EFQM kind of headings for scrutiny. So we're looking under the various, you know, leadership, people, process, and the key findings that are also shown in all of our reports that are actually shown before the recommendations. Those are grouped under those headings, and the recommendations fall out of those key findings. So there should be, or at least that's the intention, is that there's a thread through the whole narrative of the report that actually the key findings are, the content is described, the key finding is highlighted, and the recommendation is intended to address the issue highlighted in the key findings. So there is a rationale for the order, but I take the point that might not necessarily, you know, give that sort of triage of recommendations in the way that I think you're suggesting. So we'll take that away. Thanks, Grant.
Okay,
and I think that does link, doesn't it, with the issue about regulatory principles, about proportionality and targeted, so that would that I think, as well as the rationale, that would be a great help, I think, a great help. Thank you. Katrina.
Thank you. Good morning, Gillian. I want to say, actually, I really enjoyed reading this report. I just thought it was a really good piece of work. And the only question I had, and really informative, it's actually, you know, it's made me understand a lot of what it is that you're actually doing. You know, it seemed very clear. It was just a wee point of information, and you actually mentioned it in your introduction about the working with the Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And I just really wondered how that was progressing, you know, if you were making any progress in coming up with your joint scrutiny plan. Thank you.
Slowly, Katrina. And I've highlighted it a number of times, probably in most stark terms in the annual report for last year, which was actually published in October, that, you know, I've personally been involved in discussions since 2016, trying to encourage Healthcare Improvement Scotland to work with us. And they do work with the Prison Inspectorate on healthcare provision for people in the prison estate. I would argue people in police custody is actually higher risk and more vulnerable. and that Police Scotland has made enormous progress in identifying custody as an opportunity to intervene with people at a time of crisis. And they have probably, Police Scotland, that is, done as much as they can in order to make improvements without the NHS actually meeting that commitment. It's been NHS responsibility since 2013, and there has been no scrutiny of healthcare provided to very vulnerable people at time of crisis in Scotland in police custody, which is something that I am very, very keen to correct.
It's really interesting. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to invite, could just ask something, because you touched on the secondments from the police went back into the police. Are you now back at full strength, and what is full strength?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Police Scotland were very generous in returning the officers as soon as it was possible to release them back round about, I want to say August, possibly actually before that. So yes, we are back. I mentioned we are a small team that really, there are 5 lead inspector posts. All told, we're about a dozen strong, taking in the various roles within the team, and then we're that resource is augmented by a pool of associates. So there's about another 12 people in a cadre of associate inspectors that we draw on for specific expertise. So for the hate crime report, for example, you'll see there's an appendix and giving analysis of a survey, and that was carried out by Dr. Crowley, who's one of our associates. And yeah, all of the inspections will endeavour to get the best contribution from people with specific experience in the subject area.
Yeah. And those associate inspectors are not serving officers?
No, and I mean, I mentioned Dr. Crowley there. There are others within the cadre who have no direct experience, or are not ex-officers, but there also are former police officers in that pool, because they have professional experience and knowledge that's hugely valuable to the inspection work.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's just really helpful to understand the context and the operations. So I think that's been immensely helpful, and indeed we now lead on to the governance pathway in real action. As you mentioned, that you've published a very important report on hate crime, and I think where we are in terms of the governance pathway, we are still at the point, I think I'm right in June, where Police Scotland are formulating the action plan in response to that. And just for clarity, the action plan, at what point is it agreed with HMICS? Is perhaps a thought. I think that's not necessarily entirely clear. Is it, well, probably if it's taking 3 months, some action may be undertaken even before you look at the plan, but it'd just be helpful to know that. But most importantly, over to you for to highlight, I think, perhaps what you would like to bring out of that report and what you would like to see in response.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, and this was one of the inspections that was halted. It had started. The terms of reference were published in January 2020. And so having explained the consultation exercise, it had emerged as a priority really, the preceding year, and we discussed, during 2019, the various drivers at that time that made hate crime a topic of real interest for us. We were looking at the time about the implications of Brexit, the potential impact on community tensions, the online kind of intolerance, looking at the legislation that was at that time potentially going to come in the form of the hate crime bill that is now an act. So it was quite a while in the making that we decided to do a thematic inspection of hate crime in January. And that was one of those, as I say, that was halted in March. And then over the sort of spring and summer of 2020, as we all know, those issues, the drivers that I talk about, were really amplified by the pandemic and the fact that the existing inequalities were amplified by the pandemic. And it's well used phrase now, but this storm that we're all in, we're certainly not all in the same boat, and some people don't have a boat. So yeah, we've found that COVID, if anything, made the importance of a hate crime inspection even more so, as did the events with George Floyd's murder in the States and the catalyst that became for Black Lives Matter and protest about racism in society. Again, all just making more, bringing more and more focus to the subject. And then in September last year, we published phase 1 of the Training and Development Report, which picked up some shortcomings in Police Scotland's diversity training. And then in November 2020, we had the independent review of complaints handling, which again highlighted some issues in training and issues also about culture. And I would say most importantly about the experience of police officers who were actually the victims of hate crime themselves. So yeah, hate crime absolutely at any time is important, has a profound effect on people and communities and society. And it is a societal issue. It's a symptom of dysfunction in society. So I'm not, and I don't think any of us would say it's entirely a policing issue at all. It's all of our business to ensure there's a society that rejects any sort of intolerance. So there's a lot of positives in this hate crime report. When the chair asked about the timing of progress and action plans, because the time of scrutiny was elongated, we were able to see in the course of that time, Police Scotland had already taken on, had identified for themselves a lot of areas for improvement. And one of the things that I've mentioned in the report is the importance of self-assessment, that Police Scotland had already done its own exercise to understand areas where improvement could be needed. And they had already taken action in a lot of the areas. The division, the Partnerships, Prevention and Community Wellbeing Division had been created, was just announced in April this year. That's the previous Safer Communities division with other elements joined on, and I welcome that. I think that's a great important area of work and a great message that Police Scotland really values those areas. Operationally, very positive. Local officers on the front line know hate crime is important, and they know that the way that they deal with individuals who've been subjected to hate crime is massively important, and that came through that local divisions do prioritise hate crime on that reactive basis. and officers in safer communities roles, nationally, locally, they know a lot about diversity. They have a real passion for particular aspects of diversity. They have good relationships with partners and a sound knowledge of subject matter. The challenges we found was that that wasn't all necessarily joining up. So there was an absence of a coherent national strategy to prevent and detect hate crime. I've already mentioned there's a lack of training. So on diversity generally, but hate crime specifically, there's an issue about underreporting. And part of that, or part of one of the routes to reporting, is third-party reporting centres, giving people options to go, in the first instance at least, and report their experience somewhere other than a police station. And that system had really some challenges in keeping that aware, that awareness of people where those centres are and how to use them. And some real challenges in the data collection and analysis, which is a recurring theme, but basically inhibits Police Scotland's understanding of the prevalence of hate crime in society, and most importantly, the impact that then has on communities and public confidence. And yeah, I'd mentioned, the lack of support for police officers and police staff who are subjected to hate crime is an area I would highlight in the hate crime report that did find similar issues that I mentioned were highlighted in the independent review of complaints. So the 15 recommendations, and I'm conscious now of Grant's point. I'm going to highlight 3 of them, but they're not the top 3 in the list, Grant. So recommendation 4 is about the authorities' scrutiny, and I'm obviously hoping what we've talked about today actually, and the governance pathway absolutely helps to improve the scrutiny, but most importantly, give transparency, give the public the opportunity to see that scrutiny in action. Recommendation 11 talks about the good practice elsewhere, and specifically spells out that this is information that we are highlighting absolutely for Police Scotland, but in truth, Police Scotland already know most of this, but also for the authority and by extension for the public to see, right, well, if Police Scotland is choosing not to do the various things that are in place elsewhere, well, what is the alternative? What is Police Scotland doing that's addressing the same issue? And there's definitely something can be learned from the good practice elsewhere. And then the third one I would highlight is recommendation 13, which relates specifically to the experience of police officers and police staff who are subjected to hate crime on a shift-by-shift basis. And we got some very strong feedback that colleagues who haven't had the benefit of diversity training but do not understand the cumulative effect of what seem to be minor experiences, and I say minor in inverted commas. I do not think that they're minor, but the response from colleagues displays that there is a lack of understanding of the impact of the day-by-day abuse that people are subject to when they're going about their duty, and that is something that I think needs to be highlighted. But of course, I know the authority has an interest in all of the recommendations, so I'm very encouraged to see that it's not the authority looking specifically for recommendations that relate to the authority, but your interest is much wider and must look at how Police Scotland responds to recommendations, and again joining HMICS really in the desire to improve policing for the benefit of the public. So that's all I would highlight, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that's extremely helpful. That's the first time, in a sense, we've had that sort of presentation, and I just think invaluable. I would say I would expect every report to have some recommendation about how the SPA can better exercise its oversight, but actually that's fine. That's a given, and actually it's our oversight of those recommendations in the broader context. Thank you. That's very valuable. Before I open it up to committee members, Richard, you wanted to make a comment? Perhaps?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It was really just to come back to your initial question about at which stage we consult with HMICS, and so really just to answer that, the answer is when the plans are in early draft. With regard to the hate crime report, we have a first draft of that, and we'll be looking to engage as soon as possible with HMICS from next week with regard to getting a lead on those recommendations and progressing them as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Open it up to questions or comments. Katrina? You're on mute, Katrina, briefly.
It was going to happen at some point, wasn't it? Yes, thank you. And again, I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed reading this report. And it just seems like something that's a really, really comprehensive, interesting piece of work. And also just actually was really interested that of course, we're interested in all the different recommendations, but you did highlight specifically the two that I originally had highlighted for, to raise, and that was recommendation 4 and recommendation 13. So you sort of addressed, the questions I was going to ask already. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Any other, Katerina or Grant? Grant?
Thanks, Chair. Jill, I also really enjoyed reading the report. Well, enjoy is probably not quite the right phrase, actually. I found it really interesting to read, and I thought it was a very comprehensive look at it from all sorts of different angles, which was extremely welcome. I suppose one of the things that obviously it will depend on how Police Scotland and the SPA itself want to consider the timeline for responses. But I just wondered, and it may be a question for Lynn actually, which committees of the SPA do you think are best to take this forward? Because it covers and crosses all sorts of different activities. Yeah. And I know we'll ultimately come back through ARAC to look at the implementation plans, but I think it touches on different parts of the committee structure, and I think it's really a question of how best to direct the different parts of the report so that the committees are having a chance to have a look at it from their own perspectives.
Chair, can I come in? I'm very keen to avoid too much double handling of reports. This one, I think when I reported to the authority about this at our last meeting, my recommendation is it goes to PPC, because it goes, it's real policing front line. That would be my recommendation, that it goes there. Obviously, ARAC will track all the recommendations in terms of how if they're being delivered when they are agreed. So that'd be my expectation. But yeah, other reports, as I said, it would be depending on the topic where it would go, but that would be my recommendation at the moment.
Thank you. For the avoidance of doubt, I agree with that, Lynn. I think we want to avoid double or triple handling, but I think it's going to be important that there's clarity as to where it's going in the first instance before it comes back to ARAC at a later stage.
I think, and I'm not sure whether this is, yes, I think it is in the sense one for Jill for some initial thoughts, but for all of us to reflect, absolutely about data collection and analysis, which, as you say, is a recurrent theme and is an increasing theme. We've identified it within ARAC, the other committees. But as you point at, in terms of the report, what you say is currently there is no specific offence of hate crime in Scotland. So actually, the data collection is going to be bedeviled in a sense by different interpretations of what we mean by hate crime. There's also hate incident referred to. There is this report at this point hadn't been able to fully consider the impact of the recent legislation, what that makes. So, and I don't think there's an answer to this, but I simply pick up how incredibly difficult it is when we are dealing with something where I think people feel, well, particularly those on the receiving end feel from experience, they know exactly what is meant, but it's not easy to work back for data purposes, which you've identified, into something very specific that would lend itself to, shall I say, quantitative rather than qualitative analysis. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, Jill.
Yes, I mean, I think despite the different sort of noise about the Hate Crime Act, I mean, it is now an act. It hasn't been implemented yet, but the intention, or one of the good intentions of that act, would be that there would be more clarity in terms of legislation. And with that would come some reduction in the challenges of capturing the offences for recording purposes and trends and understanding. Yeah, so the report does explain quite a bit about how different forms of hate can be expressed in that sort of legislative framework. But I think that it's not unique in that sense. You know, the progress report I mentioned about online child sexual abuse, I mean, similarly, there are quite a number of different offences that could be preferred about that sort of behaviour. And really, the crime system that is now imminent, that Police Scotland will have a system that will have for the first time a genuinely national crime system, that I think will be a huge help right across different forms of crime and trends to be able to record more accurately. But I always try and caveat all of this by saying this is only about those experiences that are actually reported to the police. And some of the challenge with hate crime, but also lots of other public protection areas, is creating a level of confidence that encourages people to come forward and actually report what has happened. And that's why it's so important that the response is good, so that ripples out and encourages others to have faith that the police will take hate crime seriously and will do something about it. And that will help all of us hopefully get to a point where we've got a society that's more inclusive and more welcoming.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much indeed. And in fact, the reference to the crime system and the crime audit segues very neatly onto our next section, which is about audit and improvement progress, and where we do actually have the action plan for addressing the issues raised in the crime audit. So thank you very much indeed, Jill. Really valuable session, and moves us on. Please stay with us for as long as you would like, and we'll be pleased to see you back, I think, at the very least, I think, on an annual basis. To have this sort of session would be invaluable, but and or some of your inspectors as we go through the year. Excellent. Thank you very much. So let us move on then to item 4, which is audit and improvement. And there's quite a bundle here. And there's something in me that says if we could only index this or streamline or provide joint papers or something that would be helpful, but nevertheless. So we're starting with Police Scotland reporting, following on from that session with HMICS, reporting on progress with the recommendations made by HMICS. This was going to be Alan Spears, Richard or Andy, and I'm going to say to you for all of the rest, well, as with the previous papers, all the rest of the papers, members will have read the papers, so don't need to actually lead us through each and every, but what is it you would like to highlight, or has anything changed since you submitted the paper? So
thank you, Chair. It's myself speaking to this one on behalf of ACC Alan Spears. Before I start, I'd just like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to address the committee. It's good to see some familiar faces on the screen. I've worked with some of you before. Those of you who don't know me, I'm newly appointed as acting head of GAA for Police Scotland. So I'm quite new to this area of work. Most of my experience has been in local operational policing, but I'm really delighted to be here and looking forward to working collaboratively with you all to drive forward the changes and improvements in policing that are so important. So I will go into the highlights of the report without going into too much detail. If there are detailed questions, I'm also here with my colleague Donna Adam, who has a really good grasp of all of the intricacies. So
actually, Richard, can I be very, very rude and interrupt you there? I'm sorry, particularly as a thing, but just for clarity, because you mentioned Donna as well, could I just get that sense of the governance, the internal governance within Police Scotland? And I think it's pretty clear because we've got here, which I'm not proposing to look at in any detail, but an annual management report in effect from Donna, which gives us a governance structure, and at the head of this is an audit and risk board, which is said to be chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable Fiona Taylor. Actually, for clarity, I thought it was co-chaired by David Page, and that's quite important in this context. Have I picked that up wrongly, David?
Thanks, Chair. No, Fiona chairs, I co-chair, effectively, or vice chair. So we effectively look after it together. We can update that.
That is what I thought, because it's quite important. It's repeated a couple of times in this. Beneath that, there are two boards, the People and Professional Board, the Corporate Management Board. Beneath that is the Professionalism and Assurance Strategy Group, and beneath that there's the Governance and Audit and Assurance Senior Management Team. And I think that's the one that Donna is leading, is that right? And Richard, where are you fitting into this structure?
Well, I sit under ACC Spears as head of the Governance, Audit and Assurance structure within Police Scotland, and Donna is one of the managers within that structure who leads on the HMICS recommendations.
So who sits on the Audit and Risk Board that is co-chaired by Fiona Taylor and David Page?
All the deputies do. We all sit on it. We set it up. I set it up probably about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. One of the issues we had about the Police Scotland's attitude to audit at the time was it, to be quite honest, it didn't have the level of senior attention that audit actions require. I can see Gillian laughing there. So what we did was we set up our own audit and risk committee. So it's in no way a replacement of your board effectively. But what it does do is allows us to have an executive committee that looks at how we manage our own response to internal audit, Audit Scotland, HMICS, and a number of other audits that we have. By having all the deputies on it, effectively what it did was make everyone aware of the fact that this was really important. And at the time, 2016, 17, we had hundreds of outstanding audits. And as people know, that things get done if things get measured. And if things get measured and if they're not being done, it goes to the top of the organisation, then people respond to it. So that was the basis of how we set it up. Obviously, I've got a lot of audit experience from previous roles, including being an audit chair. So I kind of always initially chaired it, and now Fiona, because obviously Fiona runs the governance side of it. So we kind of act in tandem on everything. So we now have the right level of active engagement on a regular basis internally to monitor our response to everything. And that's reflected in the appointment of people like Richard, who come in as a senior member of operational police staff to run this. So we've got a lot more senior attention in this area, supported by top level executive engagement. So hopefully that provides a little bit of a shape.
It is, but I think you can see where I'm coming from in terms of our board exercising oversight, and so there may be one or two areas in which I think it's very good, Richard, to have the reporting of this level of activity, but actually I think I may just be, for instance, the annual report, looking to David and saying, well, are you content with this, and is this giving you the assurance that you need? I don't think we need to see each and every level of activity, because we absolutely should be able to rely on your internal management process. So I just thought it would be just helpful to establish that with so many perhaps new personnel across the landscape.
Yes, Chair. I mean, the report comes through our audit committee beforehand, so it's scrutinised by everyone on that committee and also by the subcommittees, because obviously anything feeding through to the main committee goes through my corporate management board. I cover all the things that are responsible. Donna comes into my board and lets me know how things are going in there. Same for DCC, Kurt, DCC, Graham, and Fiona herself. So we are very content that we've got both a very comprehensive report, but also really encouragingly, we're knocking off the outstanding actions now much better. So our engagement with internal audit, with Audit Scotland, is much more transparent, much more open, which means we get turnarounds quicker. And if we're slipping, we know about it early, and then we respond to it. So we're very content from a Police Scotland audit committee perspective.
Now, I think that was what I just wanted to establish, that that in terms of your internal governance, who sits on that board, as you say, and that's really helpful to have confirmed. All the papers have gone through that board. You're content, and you're content in particular, which doesn't surprise me, with some of the trends that has been showing in terms of responding to the audit. Okay, with that clarity, and my apologies, Richard, I've given you your time, but understanding that, just take us through that in a sense. Are there any areas of concern? And would you like to talk to us particularly about the HMICS crime audit strategic improvement plan, which we've already referred to? I think those are the two areas I think we'd be particularly keen to hear on, concerns and the crime audit.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think that helps a lot, that discussion, because it means that we have confidence in the process and the governance structure. So I don't need to rehearse the detail. It's all there if you need to see it. You'll see from the report that we've identified some themes and topical issues that we're tracking. They're summarised in 2.2 and 2.3. Where we have got themes and high risk recommendations, we're working with the business areas to support them, to close off those recommendations, and you'll see that summarised in graph 3. With regard to Appendix B, which is the HMICS Crime Audit Action Plan, you'll see summarised there all 6 strategic recommendations with detail actions to be taken along with target dates and owners. So it's all there for you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them as much as I can. If I can't answer, I'll defer to Donna, and other than that, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. Richard, thank you very much. That's a very helpful report and a very good summary of it. I just was looking at Appendix B, and there are a number of quite long dates for implementation in there. For example, there are a number to be dealt with by 30th September 2022, which seems a long way away. But one in particular that highlighted that we've been talking about training in section 5.3, that it's 31st December 2022 for looking at induction, training and induction and so on. And I thought these seem quite well down the track. And given the importance we've talked about earlier on in this meeting about effective training and timely training and getting the new recruits to understand the issues like hate crime and so on, I was just a bit surprised that the strategy and training plan for bespoke induction is sort of not being targeted until 31st December 2022. And I wonder if there's not some way of accelerating that a bit, given the obvious importance that we're all placing on this.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely agree that there are some very critical areas of training that need to be progressed. I think some of the timescales can be protracted, not for any other reason that there are interdependencies that mean that to some extent our hands are tied with regard to how we progress some of the recommendations. So that may well be the case with training. I know that there is currently ongoing a review of training within the force. So again, that may well have a bearing on how some of the timescales are delivered. But I take your point about the apparently lengthy dates against some of these. I can certainly go away and have a look at those and see if there isn't anything we can do to progress them. But I'm assured that there are good reasons for it. But I'll take the point and I'll see what I can do and report back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I mean, just again, in terms of process, is this a plan that is in agreement with HMICS? I mean, has it been signed off as an agreed plan, if you see what I mean? Because we are coming with, as a committee, it's not for us to redesign, but we are coming with a recommendation that you might look at some of the extended dates. So I just wondered how that sequence works. Has it been agreed with HMICS?
Absolutely. We've had several discussions with HMICS, and they're in full support of the actions that we're taking. Okay.
But we come with a recommendation. That's a thought in the context of the overall discussion. Any other questions? Any other comments? I think it will be very good to track this, and I think we might end up looking at this in a wider context, aligned with some of the other issues that's around, because this is essentially about quality data design, capture, analysis, which we've identified as the theme for this committee for sure. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed. That's good. Also on HMICS recommendations, before we move on to internal audit recommendations, John McNellis, you're going to just update us on where we are, where the SPA is in this, to the recommendations relevant to the SPA.
Thank you, Chair. Conscious of what you said, and I'll try and be brief here. This report's really in two parts. So the first part is the counter side to Police Scotland's report, so the SPA's own tracking of HMICS recommendations. Points to bring out there, we've taken ARAC's advice on board, and we're showing you now themes for some of those findings, which is new for us. What I'm conscious is that the table there shows that we haven't made a lot of progress since the last report. However, underneath that, we're working with HMICS on a couple of those recommendations, which we think we've completed, but we need to give them still that evidence to discharge the actions. And also for myself, we are starting to push now much more within SPA now that we've got staff in place to really try and discharge these actions. So I'm hoping for next quarter that we can really demonstrate some more progress. The second part of this, which is a little bit different, goes into more detail about the authority's oversight of HMICS reports. So it's reflecting back on the governance pathway and everything that we've just been speaking about. The update that I would give you there were 2 reports at the very end, which since the report's been drafted, we will be taking the hate crime report as discussed to PPC, and the COP26 report will be going to the COP26 oversight group. I think it's just good as well to reflect on what Jill Emery was saying, that yes, this shows how the authority has an interest in all recommendations, and we're considering all of these reports in some way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And yes, I think to be even-handed, I think we are looking for closure on the recommendations in respect of the SPA itself. Yes, want to see progress on that. So I think we will be looking for, I mean, I'm not sure whether you will be able, will you have been able to sign off, close all 13, do you think, by the time of our next meeting in September? Or?
I don't think we could commit to that, but what we are learning now is the need to work much closer with HMICS. And that's a particular learning point for myself, to really understand the evidence that's required, rather than going off ourselves. So I can't commit to anything, but we're certainly progressing with some added vigour, and I'm sure the Chief Executive will come in there.
Chief Executive, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, the last very productive conversation we had with HMICS was putting out from the thematic review areas that aren't in our gift, as I put it. They sit with other agencies and with the government, but I'm very focused on the ones that are in our gift and getting them signed off. And I'm very conscious that come the next time the committee meets will be 2 years since we received this report. And we really need to get them discharged. So we need to, as John has said, we're working closely with HMICS to see what they need. If it becomes an issue where we think it's closed and should be discharged, I will highlight that at the next ARAC meeting to get the members' view on that. Because there's some things we just may not agree on eventually, and I want that, you know, that ARAC to take a view on that, because 2 years is, I mean, we just need to get this sorted. And the other areas that aren't in our gift, we'll be highlighting them as well. They sit with Scottish Government, they sit with, you know, partnership working that isn't led by us. So that's my view on it, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions along with John.
No, I think that's fine. That just illustrates what we were saying earlier about the need to understand end to end, including closure. Okay. Katerina.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this may well be a small sort of semantics point, but I just wanted to clarify my understanding, because I think maybe, at least it might drive some slightly different activity. So it relates to the second part of your report, where it talks around the oversight of recommendations. Now, and as I say, this may just be my understanding, but my understanding is that do we oversee HMICS recommendations, or do we consider them through our governance? And then do we oversee the recommendations, or do we oversee the actual action plans that are attached to this? Because I have to say, as I received the report and I was reading through the headings of the document, I was expecting to see something that was, with the word oversee, I connect something that is a little bit more hands-on, rather than the presentation to a committee. So I'm not sure if I'm the only one which has got this question mark around, is it oversight, is it consideration of the recommendations? So maybe if you could just provide your thinking around this, that would be incredibly helpful to me at least. Thank you.
Chair, I'm happy to come in there if that's okay. Thank you, Katerina. So for me, a report that will go to the committee from HMICS, it goes to PPC or it goes to the People Committee or whatever. And they consider it, and then Police Scotland will report back the actions to that committee, because the committee they report to are the ones that are steeped in the day-to-day, not the day-to-day business. They're the experts in that area. So if it's People Committee, it's People Committee. ARAC is there to have an independent view that these actions are being taken forward. So that's how I see it working. As you said, it's not clear because it hasn't been clear. And part of the pathway and part of the question you asked earlier, and the chair also asked, was to have that sort of flow chart that closes this off. So it's not straightforward. It's not like an internal audit report coming to here. It's not like an Audit Scotland. It is slightly more complex. And my preference is the committee that is more knowledgeable about the area that's been reported on is the committee that should consider the actions and if they're content with them. And ARAC then are looking at these get delivered. So that would be my view on that. Chair, happy for it to be commented on or asked about. Thank you.
Certainly, thank you for the clarification, Lynn. That from my perspective, it definitely helps. I suppose it was just the word oversight that I was being pedantic about, because I was thinking, are we overseeing the recommendations or are we overseeing something else, or are we considering it? But I think at this stage it's probably best if I just park my curiosity, and once we've got the process all mapped out, I'm sure it will make a lot more sense. Thank you.
I think the interesting thing is where the consideration of the recommendations occurs, and it's worth looking back at the legislation to look at that, and the distinction that the Chief Executive draws between, quite rightly, between HMICS recommendations and internal audit, and indeed Audit Scotland. But yeah, very helpful, thank you. Good, I think content with the action being we want to see momentum and progress, if not all 13, then certainly some movement towards closure in time for the next meeting. Thank you very much. And that leads us on to, from HMICS into internal audit. That's a slightly different world of internal audit. And we have the usual progress report on how Police Scotland's and the SPA are discharging the recommendations of internal audit. I beg your pardon, in the other order, we're doing it on how internal auditors are progressing and then the discharge. I think that's right. Gary Devlin, if you're still with us, and Matthew, I can see on screen you're certainly still with us.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll answer any questions, but Matt's going to take you through the detail of both the progress report on internal audits, progress in delivering the internal audit plan, and on the work that we've done in following up progress by the SPA and Police Scotland in implementing internal audit recommendations. So it's over to Matt.
Okay.
Thanks, Gary. With the direction of the chair in mind, I'll keep this reasonably brief on the assumption that the papers have been read. There's 2 points I would like to draw to the committee's attention in relation to the progress report. The first is an inconsistency with the 12-month rolling work programme for the committee, where incorrectly within the progress report we have noted that the estates management review is due to come to the September committee, and I just wanted to confirm that that will actually be coming to January as noted in the 12-month rolling programme. So apologies for that error. The second point that I want to draw to the committee's attention is the couple of paragraphs which are at the end of the first page of our progress report and follow on into the second page in relation to the equality and diversity review. When looking to implement this review, we had intended to undertake this work on conclusion of the work which is being undertaken by colleagues within HMICS due to some overlap, and it would make more sense and add more value to do that once that work's concluded. Having spoken both to colleagues within SPA, Police Scotland and HMICS, we understand that that work has not progressed to the timeline which was originally set when we were planning the audit plan, and have noted that in discussion with SPA, we feel that this would be best to defer that work until the conclusion of work undertaken by HMICS, and we're having ongoing discussion with SPA to identify a suitable replacement audit to be undertaken within the year. Appreciate there may be some further comments either from management of either SPA or Police Scotland, or indeed would very much welcome any questions or comments from committee members from anything I've said or any other points on the report. Sorry, Chair, I think you're on mute there.
So comments. I think the thing for me, which we've touched on throughout, there's a certain misalignment, I think, in the planning of our internal audit, which was approved by the board in February, and the HMICS scrutiny plan, which was published in June, and then that overlaps. So I think offline, I'm sure we can improve the alignment and the planning. Hopefully get a better synchronicity of cycle, I think. But other than that, and the only other comment I think is, albeit I accept what's said in the response to the action log, it's still pretty heavily weighted to audits coming to us in May, in fact, to close off the internal audit year. So it would certainly be worth thinking about as we go through the year, how, if possible, we can accelerate, although I accept the window for that is narrowing in effect. And I'm not sure about commissioning an alternative internal audit report just for the sake of it, as it were. We may keep those days as contingency, and there may be a better use to be made of them, and indeed into next year. So that's just a thought. Grant.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Matthew. It's very clear that how things are progressing. Like Jane, I'm a little doubtful about the merit of trying to introduce a report on to budgeting at this stage, because from what we've been hearing from James Gray and also from others, has been that there's been huge progress being made within Police Scotland about the whole round of planning, budgeting and monitoring. So I'm doubtful about the merit in looking at that just now. But one area on A1, which really flows on from what Jane was saying, the work on the core financial systems, planning to report in May 2022. I'm conscious that Audit Scotland have said that there's a limit to the reliance they can place on their work on core financial systems, unless the work being done by internal audit is done earlier in the cycle. And I just wonder if you've now got some flexibility in your work programme, whether there'll be any prospect of doing more work in core financial systems earlier in the year, so it's reported earlier and perhaps be of more benefit to Audit Scotland. But it's just a thought.
Grant, if I maybe just answer that, we do catch up with the SPA regularly to talk about all of these issues, and we do meet with HMICS as well to try and coordinate on a quarterly basis the work of internal audit and HMICS. And I think there is scope to improve that whole process so that we are bringing a number of reports to committees a bit more evenly through the cycle. So that's already something that we're working on. I think it's a bit unfortunate about how it's played out this time, but it's just been a number of factors have contributed to that outcome. It's not how we would have planned it. In relation to the Audit Scotland relying on our work, if we are reporting in May, we would be undertaking, Audit Scotland will need us to do our testing in the 21-22 financial year. And even if we report that after the financial year, it's important for Audit Scotland that our work relates to transactions undertaken in the current financial year, if they are to place reliance on it. And we do also meet with Audit Scotland as well. So perhaps maybe we can come back in our next progress report and give the committee an update on the discussions we've had and the proposals we make in relation to all the issues that the chair and yourself have raised. I mean, I should say from my perspective, we are broadly, I mean, other than the issue that we've raised on the equalities audit, we're on track to deliver all of the audits. We're making good progress through the audit programme, we will deliver the audit plan in the timeline that the committee set for us. So in a sense, these fixes are about making the whole process work more smoothly.
Thank you very much. I wonder, it's slightly putting you on the spot, Gillian, but I wonder if you had any reflection, if not now, then worth reflecting on, if assets were able to bring forward the testing, would that be of benefit to the Audit Scotland? Auditing would enable you to place a greater reliance than, as you, I recall you saying this year, you were not able to do.
I'm very receptive to Gary's proposal that we should catch up with one another soon in terms of the scheduling of the internal and external audit work for the financial year 21-22. Very, very keen to take every opportunity, which I know is exactly what the committee would wish.
Okay. Thank you very much. John McNellis.
Thank you, Chair. Specifically on the core financial controls, this was an audit that was going to look at a new accounting standard that's due to come in, the IFRS 16 work. So the problem with the timing is that there's a limit to how far we could bring this forward. We still require Police Scotland to do the readiness work, and indeed they're still waiting for the guidance from HM Treasury to come through. But we would normally like that to be much earlier, but I don't think it will be possible for that reason.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you, John. Good to have you on top of that detail. Okay, thank you very much. So, but as Gary says, broadly speaking, on track. And if we can now look then at the management progress, where assets are saying, giving us assurance on whether or not management are progressing with the agreed management response to internal audit recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll keep this very brief because the report, I think, largely speaks for itself. Just really kind of 2 points that I would just wish to make. Firstly is that the overall progress that management have made in completion of the actions continues to be good. And one point that just kind of, for me, very sharply illustrates that is the fact that we are in the position of having the lowest number of overall overdue actions that we have ever had since the commencement of our appointment, and indeed just one action which remains outstanding from a period other than the most recently completed internal audit cycle. It's been a downward trend for a reasonably significant amount of time, with a slight, and I do hasten to add, slight uptick during the initial stages of COVID. So that downward trend just did have a little bit of a shift, but overall a strong position from management. But again, happy to take either comments from management or indeed questions from committee.
Thank you. Rarely have I heard an internal auditor be so positive. Questions, comments, Grant?
Thanks, Chair. And Matthew, I also found it hugely encouraging to see all the continuing progress in closing down outstanding actions. One point I just want to raise, and I know it's been touched on before, it's actually the cover paper. The paragraphs 3.1 and so on make reference to a statement that committee members should consider that section when considering the overall implications of our findings. But when I went to the report, I found it very difficult to correlate what's being said in this introduction section of 3.1 right through to 10.1 about environmental implications. It doesn't, I don't find it easy to then go into the rest of the report and actually identify what you mean. So I think it would be extremely helpful in future iterations of this to actually signpost in the front paper which particular aspects you think we should be focusing in on. It's just a wee bit vague in general for me to actually home in very easily. But otherwise, I found the report itself, the progress in that, extremely encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Funny enough, I had framed exactly the same question, and I wondered if you could tease out what are the, if there are any, what are the key areas, or really what we're looking, I think, for is, are there any areas of concern in your view?
Yeah, so Chair, what this will do is it will highlight in priority order any of the actions that are outstanding that have not been implemented by an agreed date. And what that translates to is the acceptance of risk by the body. So if there's an internal control finding which is highly risk rated or amber risk rated that's not been addressed in a timely fashion, then the organisation continues to accept the risk. So you're right, perhaps we could draw attention to any concerns we have in relation to that risk context.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful. And can we capture that as an action point? Thank you. Gillian.
Thank you, Chair. So I was very conscious from the action tracker document that we had at the front end of the meeting that arrangements have been agreed that the cover papers for internal audit reports will now rest with key SPA officers going forward. And I'm assuming these were prepared prior to that decision having been made. So where it's from the first party, all of these are written currently by internal audit. Going forward, it will be written by SPA officers. So any references to I or we or whatever will be SPA officers, and it will be for the officers to be clarifying their thought process about the financial, personnel, equality implications, etc., because it's the SPA cover sheet. So I see that Matthew's going to be able to bring us right up to date about what the intentions are. I think it was just a cross between the action being decided and the preparation of these papers, and that would address Grant's query there, I think.
Yeah, you've taken the words virtually out of my mouth, Gillian. And when I saw your hand up, I was assuming it was on that very point. As noted in the action log, that is a work in progress as things stand. And having had discussions with John McNellis in advance of this meeting, the reason that wasn't noted for being closed is because it was felt that the most pressing example of the transition was actually going to manifest itself when we had a more typical internal audit review being presented, and that was why it wouldn't be closed off at this stage. So you're absolutely right, but it's probably fair to say at the moment it's in a slightly transitional state from us having previously drafted them, from SPA management doing that from here on in.
I respect that. I think I'm going to push at that a little and say I'm looking for both parties. I'm looking for internal audit to give us a view, as well as the SPA to give us a view.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair, Chair. And I think in practice, it's one which even previously these things were discussed in both directions. So it's more the formality that SPA will ultimately be the writer of this, but it's one where John and I do speak regularly on many matters. And if there's anything that we feel needs to be highlighted, we will pass that on to John to enable the appropriate preparation of the papers. Sorry, the cover paper, I should say.
No, well, that sounds like progress. Thank you very much. And then we come to 4E, which is Police Scotland. So to some extent, this is covering the same ground because it's covering the internal audit recommendations. It also collects in one place all of the audits arising elsewhere. For instance, HNICS, but there'll also be things like ICO and indeed Scottish Crime Record, yes, the annual audit. And it contains an annual report, which, as I say, is more, I think, of a management report, which, as David has assured us, has gone through the Police Scotland internal board. So it would normally be Alan Spears, but on this occasion it's back to Richard again. Is that? Yes.
Yes, that's right, Chair. Thanks very much. Absolutely correct. The Appendix E, the risk assurance annual report, is included for your attention only. It's been through the internal scrutiny, so I won't go into any detail on that unless you particularly want me to. I'll just pick out a couple of highlights in the interests of efficiency. So we're making good progress implementing our recommendations. And as you can see, the number of percentage completed and on track are going in the right direction. We're certainly reducing the number of recommendations that have been missed, which is evidences the focus at departmental and divisional levels on these recommendations, and our strong monitoring through the management board structure. And for the fourth quarter running, we have no high risk recommendations missed, which is good news. 8 have been missed that have been reported previously. There's good reasons for that, and full details are included in Appendix B for your information. Since this report has been produced, we've further reduced those, so we're ready now to present a further 4 of those for closure within the next quarter. Most of those are in the events arena. In terms of the risk of non-delivery against target, again, good progress or at advanced stage. The report includes percentage completion for many of these that I think helps to distinguish between recommendations that either haven't been started or at an advanced stage of completion, so you can see where along the line of progress they are. Since producing the paper, we've closed another 3 of these, which leaves only another 2 to address. And you'll see at section 2.5 the on hold recommendations that require other issues to be resolved before they can be concluded. So you'll see good rationale for those as well contained in the report. And other than that, I won't labour what's in the report already that you have seen. So I'll just open that out to any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a good trajectory. Indeed. Any questions or comments from members? I think we've covered some of this as we've gone through, but this captures everything in one place, as it were.
Thank you. It's not a question. It was just to say, Richard, I found it very easy to follow through, and it's very good to see the progress that's being made and the action that's being taken on all fronts. So well done, very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't take credit for that. I have to admit that is entirely down to Donna and her team and others who have done all the hard work up until now. But thanks very much for that.
Okay. Katerina?
Yes, no, similar sentiment from me as well. Thank you very much for the report and for I suppose what it does evidence is that there is a great degree of activity that is happening behind the scenes, and not so much behind the scenes at the forefront to close off the recommendations. And I was wondering, in terms of your own management governance structure, to what degree do you actually look at the impacts that all this activity is delivering? You know, because obviously as recommendations are being closed off, there will be some very tangible impacts in some instances, and some will be more the foundation for something else. So are there any highlights in terms of the impacts of the closure of all these recommendations that you could bring to our attention?
I think that's a really pertinent question, and I have to say that I think that it's probably one area where we could improve, because when it comes to closing recommendations, it has to be said that sometimes that can be seen as the end of the matter, when really it's not necessarily the case that concluding a recommendation does deliver the outcome that we want. So I think that's an area that we need to get better at in the future. We certainly do need to review ourselves what the impact and outcomes of these recommendations are. Obviously, they are subject to further audit and inspection internally and externally in due course. So it may be that some of those do come back, but it's a good point, well made, and I think it's one that we need to look at.
And I think it's absolutely right from both of you. And although some of these are subject to follow up, as it were, internal audit. I mean, if we are talking about better thinking and a strategic view of the planning, then actually, rather than just dealing on a year to year, are we mapping out a 3 to 5 year? Well, what we do have, and in fairness to internal audit, there is a 3-year cycle, but have we sufficiently identified going back and reviewing and evaluating, all of which is entirely consistent with the principle of continuous improvement. So that's good. Good, thank you very much indeed. And then finally, in this omnibus section, we have similarly from the SPA and tracking recommendations outstanding for the SPA. John, I think you're going to cover this.
Thank you, Chair. The first point I would say, this is the first reporting for this financial year for SBA, and we've taken the opportunity to refresh the style of report, as you see in front of you. So again, a report of two parts. The first looks at progress against the SPA's business plan for 21-22. You'll see there's 25 priorities that were approved by the board in the business plan. And what we've done is underneath each of those priorities, we've teased out a number of milestones which will help us to monitor how we're achieving towards meeting that target. And that was something that the Chief Executive has agreed to do at the board. Vast majority of those are on track, with only 3 actions, milestones being delayed, and there's a bit of detail within the report about how we intend to get back on track. The second part of the report, again, is that update on the SPA's specific audit and improvement recommendations. Again, like I said, this is a new style of report, so we're showing you the totals by provider, risk rating, and again, theme, which was one of the areas you'd asked about before as a committee. We're also showing you progress since our previous quarter reporting with specific detail of any areas which aren't on target. And now again, I would draw your attention to, we have 5 overdue actions, and the report gives you a bit more information about what we're specifically doing on each of those. The one that I would call out to you is the National Records of Scotland action, which we discussed at the last ARAC. This was about getting a data sharing agreement in place. For the progress on that, the Chief Executive has now agreed to a document which has been signed and is with Police Scotland. And actually, I've heard confirmation now that Police Scotland are content with the document. We're just waiting on that being formally signed off. The final point I would draw your attention to is underneath all this new report, SBA's done quite a detailed review about how we manage and track our recommendations. We've now got extra staff who are helping to manage that area. And we've again developed a refreshed single tracking document, which has made completing this report so much easier. It allows us to give you different insights that we wouldn't have been able to do before. So I actually just wanted to recognise the hard work of the team, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And good to particularly to hear about the data sharing agreement, because that is one, and indeed we really do want to be pressing ahead with the ICO recommendations, which have been long outstanding, albeit we cleared off a large number of those recommendations. So, questions, comments, comments? I personally find this format very helpful and very accessible, not only I think for the committee, but perhaps for other readers, the public, and given that we're talking about public visibility and accessibility. Grant, you're on mute.
Apologies, I thought I'd managed to avoid doing that today. Thanks, Jane. John, I found that a very helpful report, and like the chair, I found it very easy to follow, and I think it's very informative, so well done in creating it. And one of the delayed milestones on page 3, there's reference to no bids from suppliers for doing some work. Do you happen to know whether that is because we're trying to do something that's too bespoke for them, and if that is the case, would there be an alternative way of approaching it to be able to make some progress with that?
Thanks, Grant. That was a specific issue, without getting into too much detail, apparently related to the timing of when we were tendering this. So it happened during the second wave, and a lot of our suppliers were struggling within the timescales. They were also struggling, I think, to be fair, to understand exactly what we were looking for. I can tell you that we've went back out, we've taken the feedback on board, and we do now have some suppliers that have bid for the work again. So we've taken that learning on board for sure. I think there's an issue about timing and a lesson learned about being a bit clearer with suppliers on what we're actually asking for.
Right, oh good, well that's very reassuring, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Anything else? No? Good, thank you. Well, that concludes I think, a very satisfactory overview of all of the recommendations and actions from both Police Scotland and the SPA in response to both HMICS internal audit and indeed some of our other external scrutinies like the ICA. Good. We move on then to where am I? Sorry, I'm just following the agenda, beg your pardon. Audit Scotland. We're pleased to have Gillian Woolman here, and Gillian, just to talk to us about your management report, current state of play, future plans.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm shortly going to hand over to my colleague Pauline Gillen to take the committee through the management report, which we produced at the end of our interim visit, where we're looking at key financial systems. But Chair, I'm also happy to go on the record as your external auditor to also reiterate how much we welcome all of the preceding reports, which demonstrates both an evolving and effective process for the monitoring and follow-up and reporting of the implementation of all of the recommendations from the various scrutiny and audit bodies that you're having to deal with. And I'd like to assure committee members that we always take cognizance of all of the work that's been undertaken there and the progress made for improving the overall control environment for all of those areas. So with that, Chair, I'll just hand over to Pauline for the management report before you. Thanks.
Thank you. Pauline, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So the paper we're bringing to you today is our 2021 management report, which, as Gillian says, details the results of the work that we carried out with regard to the financial systems and processes used by SPA and Police Scotland. It's a short summary of the work that we carried out on paras 9 and 10. Our testing involved looking at the system controls in place for payroll, cash and banking, trade payables and receivables, and the general ledger. We also carried out some early substantive testing on income transactions and on staff costs and expenses. Overall, we concluded that during the last year, we've seen evidence of continued strengthening of the control environment with improvements in a number of systems. This is an important finding for us, as it allows us to take the assurance that we planned for our financial statements audit work, which is currently underway. In addition, I think another important finding, just to draw to your attention, is that we didn't find evidence of the control environment being adversely affected by COVID-19 and the wholesale move to home working over the last year. So the controls continue to operate as expected throughout the year. In the report, Exhibit 1 provides detail of the key findings from our work and the associated management response and agreed action and timescales where appropriate. I don't propose to go through them individually, although there are only 6 of them. I would just highlight that for 2 of them, new controls were implemented midway through the year. So from that point on, our testing showed that they were operating effectively and there were no issues. So any issues that we did identify were at the start of the year before the new controls come into place. So to address those weaknesses, we will just focus our sample testing during our financial statements audit on that earlier part of the year when the controls were a bit weaker. You can see that there's comprehensive responses for all the issues from management, and we are content that they address the identified weaknesses. That's all I propose to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions on the detail in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Very, very positive report. Any thoughts, questions? I suppose just for clarity and confirmation, you have actually, as you say, carried out work on the wider dimension audit of financial sustainability, governance, transparency, value for money. You've not commented on those. I wondered if it was appropriate to ask you to comment at this point.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that's mainly a timing issue. So this report last year would have come to you at the May ARAC. So that would have felt like a good point. This is typically called our interim report. So it would be a good point in the interim part of the year to report on those things. Because it's a bit later and we've started the financial statements audit, we're going to be coming back to you in the middle of September with our annual audit report for the year, which will go into an awful lot more detail on those wider dimension areas. So we just thought that there wouldn't be a huge amount of value in reporting on them in the middle of July to then to come back in 2 months to report on them again in a bit more detail. Yeah. And also for some of the financial sustainability stuff, we would be working on the unaudited figures. And given that we've already made a start on the audit of the financial statements, we didn't think there was an awful lot of value in reporting on figures that we've not audited when we'll be bringing further detail back at some point. We did comment, I think we did comment on financial management in general. And as you mentioned earlier in the committee, we have seen continual improvements every year in the financial management and the budgetary control in the organisation. And we have commented positively there.
Good. Okay, and I think I'm going to take some comfortably assurance from Gillian's comments just immediately preceding on the scrutiny in respect of the governance, and indeed we're just about to look at best value, so that does cover some of those aspects. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Pauline, thank you very much for the clarity in your presentation. I've just got two things I want to look at in relation to Exhibit 1, I should say. One is on the employee validation checks. The management response suggests that no further action is required to address this recommendation, and I just wondered if you were comfortable with that, because it does look as if it's still an open-ended issue. And the second one was really, it's possibly more for management. It's the changes to supplier details. I note that the work that's being planned, but it doesn't appear to have a target date, and I wondered again to monitor closure of that item, whether a target date could be inserted. Thank you.
Thank you. So in response to the first point about the employee validation checks, yes, as you can see, it's a really comprehensive response. And I think during the time that we were doing the audit testing and we had come up with our original issue, we were getting information back from management to respond and say what their mitigating actions are. And you can see there is a lot of detailed work. It was a bit of a timing thing, so we weren't able to see evidence of these things as part of our audit work. But we do additional testing as part of our financial statements audit on our own on employee validation. So we're content with that response, and we would expect that when we come back next year to do the same testing, that we'd be able to have access to these reports. It was just a timing thing. It took a bit of time for us going backwards and forwards to get responses and for each side to understand the other side's position. But we're happy with the response that they've given us.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
And for the changes in supplier detail, just I don't know whether perhaps Alistair might want to comment on a target date for it, but just to point out that will also be part of our sample testing for our financial statements audit, where we will focus on some of the transactions at the start of the year just to ensure that there's no risk there.
Okay, thank you.
Alistair.
Yeah, happy to do so. Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Pauline. Grant, I apologise. I'm not sure what's happened there, whether we've got something lost in translation or whether it's an omission. So let me go back and check my records. I know that Paul did come forward with a very proactive response to that particular point, and I know it is work underway. I seem to recall an end of August date on that, which maybe we've dropped along the way, but I will get a date on that, and we will close that off. So
okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Gillian and Pauline. Good to see everything on track and so far. And I'm sure there will be no firecrackers. So we move on then to item 6, best value. This was something we've discussed a few times, and we had a very interesting briefing on the state of play at the last committee meeting, and we now have proposals from SPA, the Chief Executive, on how the SPA proposed to take this forward. So Lynn, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just do some introduction, then ask John to take you through the report. So in terms of best value, as you know, it's more complicated than other organisations, I think, and best value is responsibility on the authority, there's responsibility on the accountable officer, and there's responsibility on the Chief Constable to do with Police Scotland. So what we're trying to do is make this as understandable and straightforward as we can, and to tackle it in a straightforward way. Anyone that's been through a best value audit in local government, which I've been through a couple of times, it is a very intense, extensive piece of work, and we want to be well prepared for that. And at the moment, we can't give an assurance of where we are in terms of self-assessment. So this is what this is about, a sort of pathway through that. I've had some conversations with DCO Page, who may want to comment on Police Scotland and how they're going to be taking forward their side. Again, it is very much from the SPA's perspective that you have oversight of that, to go back to some questions from Katerina earlier on, but it's obviously sits very much with the Chief as to the delivery of best value in there. So that's just a background to it. It could be very complicated. We're trying to make it straightforward. We are following, I would say, the Audit Scotland, and I think it's 7 areas that they look at. We will look at those and see how we perform. So this is setting out really as our stall and how we'd like to take this forward. I'll pass over to John now to take you through the report, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. John, I mean, bear in mind that the committee members will have read it, and indeed it's a development from our previous discussion. So you'd, yeah, I think particularly, I mean, it seems to be exactly as Lynn has identified. There are 2 aspects. One is about the SPA's own approach, and the second is about the oversight of the responsibility which lies with the Chief Constable.
Perfect, thank you, Chair. If I maybe focus just even then on highlights from the executive summary. The first thing I'd say, this is a priority for the SPA's business plan. This is the first step in our journey, specifically for SPA and forensics at this stage. But what this paper does, first of all, you know, and writing it for my interest, is trying to put across in an understandable way what is best value and what are our requirements. So there's detail in there, which Lynn's touched on, but what are the legal requirements from the Act? What are the requirements on the accountable officer and Chief Constable, which are outlined? And then I move on to talk a little bit about what does achieving best value mean versus demonstrating best value. And what I'm trying to distinguish in doing so is there's so much activity out there that we do. We achieve best value in many, many different ways. But what Lynn has touched on already, we might fall down at the minute with demonstrating that in a brought together and informed way. So we could be missing out on a trick on improvements, and that's partly what this approach is about doing. It's demonstrating and setting out how we will do that, and the details in there, but in summary, it'll be based on an annual self-assessment, and from that annual self-assessment, we will do some deep dive areas that will look at the Audit Scotland characteristics, and we will propose to do some of the Audit Scotland best value toolkits, as well as other sources of information, to look at each area on a cyclical basis. That's all I was going to say, but I would also like to offer my thanks to Audit Scotland, ASETS and HMICS for a lot of the discussions that we've been having to get to this point. So I really valued that input, and also from having discussions with Chair of ARAC and Resources Committee, who have both fed into this development. But of course, this is the first stage.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. And I think it's very clear. I suppose the question I had put to you earlier, so you know this is coming, is, and it came out of our discussion last time. There are many different sources, as it were, of best value, many authorities. For us in particular, there is the 2012 legislation, which actually stipulates some things to be taken into account. There is the Audit Scotland approach, and what I just thought would be useful is somewhere to capture how those cross-refer, so that if we follow the Audit Scotland, principles, we cannot be challenged that we have not taken account of the 2012 legislation. I mean, 2012 was 2012, sometime hence, and things have moved on. So I don't think it will be difficult to reconcile them, but I think it's worth specifically reconciling them. And then you get to the authority's approach to demonstrating best value, and we're saying the self-assessment is based on the Scottish Government's accountable officer best value guide, and how does that relate to the Audit Scotland principles? So I think it's about how do those all fit together, as well as the journey, the steps and process that you're outlining seem to be extremely sensible, but I'm not sure that we have quite yet captured the reconciliation of those three authorities, as it were. Sure. Gillian, did you have a comment, or shall I let John respond to that and then invite you? Thank you. John.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think if you look at page 5 of the report, that outlines exactly what you were talking about, the requirements on the Act and Audit Scotland's best value characteristics. And like you say, Chair, the Act comes from quite a number of years ago now. And if I think back to even my time in audit, best value at that time meant value for money. It has evolved much more over time, and Audit Scotland's best value characteristics are what I would call best practice. And even if we look at further into the Act, it says that we should have regard for guidance which is issued by Scottish ministers, and that is where you feel you get into the accountable officer guidance. It also says we should be cognizant of best practice examples out there, which again I would say are Audit Scotland's best value characteristics. So these aren't factors which are going against each other. It's an evolution of what best value is over time. And a lot of those factors from the Act are really what I would consider to be use of resources now. They're all subsets of the same thing. But we will do that, certainly. When we get to doing our deep dive work, we will be cognizant of all the requirements of the Act, and the Audit Scotland guidance and the Audit Scotland toolkits, as well as other guidance that's out there. There's some other very good pieces of information that HMICS have pointed us to as well. I think it will depend on the subject matter at the time. So we'll certainly do that. And I think in everything that we do, we'll be looking at the different characteristics and making sure we're not missing anything.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Gillian.
I really welcome these set of slides. I think it's very engaging, and I think it's a good way of disseminating key messages with respect to best value beyond, obviously, the committee members. And I think I've got a solution, Chair, for your reconciliation. So when we're looking at page 5 on the right-hand side, which is entitled Audit Scotland and Audit Scotland's best value characteristics, they're not Audit Scotland's. And whilst we've been online, I've just double-checked. They sit at the heart of the Scottish Public Finance Manual as published by the Scottish Government. So the concurrent with Scottish Government's thinking and in terms of any of the associated acts for the formation of the two bodies. So I think I think slide 5 probably would have to be corrected in that regard if it was disseminated any further. So just that's one observation there. So it's not as if we're you're going to have to triage anything there. That's already there. I really welcomed John's emphasis about the fact that there is so much going on in the two respective organisations, and so often it's about capturing it and demonstrating it in a proportionate fashion for that positive affirmation of what's in place. I do have to say, look, as you look at those 7 headings there, though they are constantly stretching every organisation, and I have completed 4 substantial best value assurance reviews of councils during this current appointment round, and the deeper you're immersed in all of these topics, the more and more you're challenging of everything that's happening around you. So very, very delighted to have learned from the previous discussions. When I look at characteristic 7, fairness and equality, it's explicitly captured by HMICS and also the evolving internal audit work that you have captured. But I don't think any organisation is stopping on that topic. There are constantly more things to be done there. So as well as demonstrating what you're currently doing, you will be stretched and there will be more things to challenge internally under a number of those topics. And when I look at working with communities, certainly over the life of this appointment round, what a lot has changed by way of SPA's interaction with local government, for instance, and I know that's a path that you articulate quite a bit going forward with future. So there's a huge amount in that, but I'm very delighted to see how this topic has been picked up and is going forward with SPA. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. There's something I recall mentioning before, perhaps not in this context, but it's like Zeno's paradox. You never get there. It's an eternal journey, but an eternal journey of improvement. As to which I think probably, actually I may preempt what Grant is about to say. I had another suggestion, but I'll perhaps see if Grant makes it. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know what you're going to come up with, but I totally agree that this is an evolving situation, and the culture of continuous improvement is so important across all organisations. What I was really going to home in on was things like the continual need to do benchmarking with other organisations to see how they're all moving ahead in parallel as everything is evolving. And to gather enough evidence to be able to show that we can demonstrate the impact of these arrangements. And I think whenever anybody is asking you, how do you demonstrate best value? Someone's going to say, well, where's the evidence of how you've done it? And I would just like to be sure that we've got enough tracking mechanisms in place to be able to demonstrate that when the question's asked. Thank you.
So both activity and impact.
Yes.
Okay. John, you want to respond briefly to that, and then?
Yes, as part of the self-assessment, what we're very keen on is to have that informed by evidence, but also we're looking at doing benchmarking at the same time to do that. What I would like to get to is a position where that self-assessment illustrates our continuous improvement. If we do it every year, we start to see improvements and changes, which are all backed by evidence. And then again, like I say, when we do our deep dives, we can look at specific areas in a bit more detail and hopefully come up with areas for improvement.
Okay, thank you. Katrina.
Yes, thank you. Just to reiterate what other people said, it's a really clear report. It's really easy to read and it's really comprehensive. I did have a question around how the best value work for the SPA does dovetail with Police Scotland, and I noted that there are two different things here. There's our own best value, delivery of our best value and a strategy to achieving that, and then there's also our role as the SPA to the Police Scotland, so there it's a slightly different role. This is a newbie question really, but can I just clarify that what's really happening here is that the SPA, we're sorting out our own route to providing best value before we then really sort of take on, you know, in a really robust way that scrutiny of Police Scotland. Is that what I'm picking up?
Chair, can I come in there? Thank you. Thank you, Katrina, for the question. So I said in my introduction, I've been having conversations with DCO Page, and my own expectation is that there's numerous ways that we, across the whole of the policing system, can demonstrate best value, because it's not just value for money, which is the old style. We just don't have a systematic way to assess. But the role of the authority is for SPA Corporate and SPA Forensics, we are responsible for demonstrating best value. The Chief Constable is responsible for Police Scotland, and our role as authority is to be assured that that work is happening and that demonstration can be made. Now, this isn't, we've already had, this is based on conversations we've had with the Auditor General, and the Chief Constable was in those calls, so was the Chair, and so was Ms. Woolman. And he was saying it isn't imminent that they're going to come and look at us, but we will be getting looked at as a policing system at some point. So this is us trying to start that work. Mr. Page might want to comment on the police side of things, but our role as an authority to be assured that that's happening and can be demonstrated, not doing that work for Police Scotland or doing that work to Police Scotland. And I have to say, forensics is an area that we've just had early discussions on. We need to take that forward as well. So that's my focus. Also, I'd like to say that this could be an industry in itself, and I'm determined that it's not. We can get bogged down in filling in forms, and we need to be pragmatic and proportionate. And that's what I'm trying to bring some balance to as well. So that's where we are. Thank you, Chair.
But in response to Katrina's question, the simplified answer, I think, is that it's broadly sequential. That is, we do want to, as we are now have, getting our own house in order and dealing with part 2, which is what the police are doing, and then thing. So I suppose just on that, back to that, putting our own house in order, but actually achieving all this and demonstrating this. There's something, I think, inherent in what you've been saying, but not explicit, John, in some milestones. This, I know that's in this year's business plan, but we've got our approach to demonstrating best value. Have we got some key milestones? What have you hoped to have in place by the end of the financial year, for example, within that year of the business plan?
By the end of the financial year, we'll have certainly done our annual self-assessment. We'll have identified areas that we would like to look at, and certainly started on the journey of doing some of those more detailed pieces of work. And that's an area that we're looking to take forward. And I can tell you that the Chief Executive is looking to chair a group within the SPN Forensics that will take forward that piece of work.
But I think, it would be good to just have some citing of that, just 2 or 3 key milestones, not looking for massive amount of detail. Lynn, is that?
You're on mute, Lynn.
You're mute.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Chair, the milestone is we will do a self-assessment by the end of the year. Okay. That's simple as that. You and I like about milestones. We will do it and it will be delivered. So anything before that, obviously, Chair, that in your role as Vice Chair, you've got an update group, and best value will be one of those areas that will report to you. But as far as I'm concerned, that is our milestone to be delivered, and we can track it through your group if that's okay, rather than keep bringing things back to committee if that's okay.
I think that's absolutely fine. We, in a sense, captured that as an extra action. Anything else? David Page?
Thanks, Chair. Just to build on what John and Lynn have been saying, but from the Chief Constable's perspective, and also to give the committee some reassurance about what we've been doing on the Police Scotland side on the best value. Very early doors, when I came in myself and the Chief went and met with Caroline Gardner, it was very clear to us, and Gillian Woolman had very kindly explained the gap in one of her last meetings at the Audit Committee, which was one of my very first meetings at the Audit Committee. Gillian had explained the gap in where we needed to be versus where we were. So quite early on, we engaged with Audit Scotland. In fact, in 2017, Stephen Boyle, who's obviously now the Auditor General, came along with his team to meet all of my senior management team to run through the best value toolkits. And that was in 2017. And since then, we've used that as a platform for making many of the improvements we've made. I mean, a key thing, if you look at the best value toolkits, are around leadership tone and style, and whether you appropriately resource your finance function, which is an underpin for best value. We've increased Police Scotland's finance function since 2017 by 103 people. It sounds an awful lot, and it relatively is compared to what we had beforehand. But we've restructured the finance function. because the finance function was a collection of what had been there previously in the legacy functions and had been stripped out to a large degree by the redundancy programs that were running at the time. We built up a new finance function, and actually in terms of cost, in real terms, if you look at the pay rises in SBRM since 2017 to now, it's actually costing us less to run the finance function that we've now got. That is the platform for all of what we're doing in best value. So we use the Audit Scotland Best Value Toolkits, and we've been using them since 2017 to try and address many of the areas that you have to demonstrate. I think to Lynn's point and some of the other comments, the evidencing and demonstrating it is a really important part. We did a benchmarking exercise with SIPFA on a Police Scotland perspective a couple of years ago, where we asked SIPFA to benchmark our financial controls, environment, governance management against all other police forces in the UK. And the feedback from that was that we were very, very well placed. So it is something that is at the front of both the Chief Constable and my mind and the Force Executive. And with the financial model we have in place now, with the finance function and finance business partners, which operate in every part of the organisation, and using Green Book methodology for investment appraisals and project management, we're pretty well placed to make sure that best value is one of the things that's at the forefront of our minds in pretty much all our decisions. And again, people like Grant will have seen this over a good number of years now through resources and what have you. But just to provide some reassurance that we do an awful lot on this at the moment, but we will work with Lynn and John going forwards in terms of making sure that we keep in sync. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Gary Devlin.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd make a comment from an internal audit perspective, and really it echoes many of the comments that have been made, that one of the challenges for maybe the policing system has been how it manages to articulate performance and continuous improvement, this performance management system and framework. And that's been developing over time, but it's not yet in a place, I think Audit Scotland have raised this previously, where it's fully coherent enough, perhaps at this point, to meet all best value expectations around how you demonstrate performance. You know, I would just say that's probably a key area of focus.
Okay. Good. David, did you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, one thing I would add is we are on a journey, and we have been since 2013, obviously since 2017, since we started to really kind of invest in the financial capabilities of the organisation and the cultural approach. We've made huge strides, and that's been recognised by internal audit and others. But my caveat is we're a large organisation. We've got 23,000 people in the organisation. So even though we're making lots of improvements, I'm under no illusion that we're ever going to reach the end of the journey, let alone beyond that journey at the current time. We're always going to find pockets of either bad behaviour or ill-informed behaviour or ignorance popping up in an organisation, especially when you've got such kind of rotation of staff that comes through it. Our objective is for the right cultural position in place, the right framework and the right controls to try and keep us on the right journey. So again, it just echoes the fact that it is a continuous process improvement journey, which we're never going to get off. That's the point, Chair. Thank you.
I entirely accept that, the right culture, the right journey. I think as much as anything else, understanding what are realistic expectations. That's something worth exploring. I think as we move through this level of activity and ability to demonstrate. But that seems, I take from committee members, I mean, we're all definitely content with this approach and the trajectory that we're seeing, and with that commitment to self-assessment by the end of the year, which gives us some clarity. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That then takes us to just the final item of business for us, which is to see the committee work plan. And we've touched on this from time to time. I think it's was established is actually correct as regards the estates management internal audit coming to us when it does come to us, which is intended to be January, I think. We've touched on the fact it's quite heavy in terms of internal audit reports for May. Well, if there is anything that can be done to improve that, it would be helpful. Of the emerging items, I suppose I would also put on there, it's an emerging item, but we are committed to a development day for the committee in terms of committee effectiveness. That's something we've done over the last 2 years. I think that's a valuable thing to do, and we'll do that again probably around late October after we've quickly dealt with the accounts and before the January meeting. Is there anything else? I think particularly Chief Executive Lynn, is there anything you think might be an emerging theme that's not captured, an emerging item not captured here?
No, Chair, I'm content with the work plan, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from committee members, or indeed from Audit Scotland or assets from your perspective, things that are on the horizon we should be cited of? No. Okay. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. Like you, I was a bit concerned about how much was going to come through in the May meeting, because that looks quite heavy. But I wonder if it would help to smooth out the whole planning pattern if, instead of getting the annual internal audit plan in January 2022, whether there might be any prospect at all of getting it at our previous meeting so that it could be agreed and put into place slightly earlier in the whole process, so that more is done in the year.
Although that would completely misalign with HMICS's, or maybe it wouldn't, because actually it would then align with HMICS's mid-year internal review. That's a thought.
It's just a thought.
It is, Chair. I mean, what we have to do is complete a programme of work within the financial year that enables me as the head of internal audit to provide an annual audit opinion on the internal control framework. So that tends to result in a programme of work that maps across to the financial year, simply to get the work done that year. There are things we can do around the edges of that, but it might be a little bit more difficult, because if we complete the programme of work in, say, March, the question is, when do we start the planning for the next year's programme of work? I mean, I take Grant's point. You know, if there is a way to perhaps bring that forward a little bit, then we should explore that. And you know, I'd be happy maybe with Lynn and John to look at what the options are around that.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments? If not, can I thank you all very much indeed for, in fact, finishing a few minutes earlier than intended. So that is the end of the public session. We will break, and as I said before, those who are not joining us for the private session, if they could log off. Those who are remaining, just keep your channels open, but shut off your camera and video. We were going to resume at